Imagine returning home after a long day, looking forward to spending time with your family, only to discover something unimaginable happened while you were away. In 2017, 12-year-old Yhoana Arteaga's case left her family and community searching for answers. At first, investigators faced a mystery. No clear witnesses or obvious evidence pointed to what happened. But then, they found a critical clue in a text message Johanna had sent to her mother just before the incident. That single detail would become the key to solving the case. Authorities began looking into individuals who may have been involved, including Coons Jr., who had prior encounters with law enforcement. The nature of the allegations raised serious questions, leaving many wondering what truly happened. To fully understand how this situation unfolded, we need to rewind to the beginning. Our story takes place in Goodlettsville, Tennessee, a quiet town of around 17,000 people. It's not known for bright lights or big crowds like nearby Nashville, but it's the kind of place where life moves at a slower, more peaceful pace. For the most part, it's a town where neighbors know each other and things feel familiar. But for one young girl, Goodlettsville wouldn't turn out to be the warm and safe place her family had hoped for. Yhoana Arteaga came into the world in 2005, born to Patricia Velasquez and Marlon Arteaga. While her early years began with both parents together, the relationship didn't last. When Yhoana was still a child, Patricia and Marlon went their separate ways. After the separation, Patricia became the primary caregiver and eventually moved with her 3 children into a trailer park, doing her best to create a stable life in a new home. Yhoana spent her childhood with her mother and 2 siblings, her younger brother Oscar and her older sister Jocelyn. Their mother, Patricia, was originally from Mexico, where she had worked professionally as an architect. However, after moving to the United States and becoming the head of a young family, her priorities shifted entirely. She focused all her time and effort on raising her children, striving to give them a happy and supportive home life. Patricia encouraged her kids to dream big, even when those dreams felt out of reach. Yhoana had a deep love for technology and was always excited to learn about computers. She was also dedicated to martial arts and had a real passion for karate. In fact, Yhoana's curiosity extended into many areas, and her mother admired her for that. Patricia believed her daughter had the heart and determination to do great things, no matter what career path she chose. Sadly, that chance was taken away too soon. But before we begin, I just want to say thank you to my amazing viewers and subscribers. Your support through likes, shares, and comments means the world to me. Your engagement helps make these stories even more meaningful. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of true crime enthusiasts.
On August 10th, 2017, Yhoana stayed at home alone. She had recently hurt her ankle while skating and was using crutches to move around. That day, she decided not to go out with her mother and siblings, choosing instead to watch a movie quietly in her room. Her family was only gone for a short time. This makes what happened next even more unsettling. That evening, at 6:45 p.m., emergency services received a very urgent call. 911, can you please tell me your location? Jocelyn was too overwhelmed to recall their address immediately. Her mother was even more distraught. The situation was serious. Someone had passed away, and the police needed to respond without delay. That kind of heartbreak carries a universal sound. Whether it's spoken in English, Spanish, or any language, there's a tone in a grieving mother's voice that you never forget. It leaves a mark on everyone who hears it. When officers arrived, they quickly recognized the distress in Patricia and her daughter Jocelyn's voices. In just a short time, while they had been out, something unthinkable had happened to Yhoana inside the safety of their home. It's the kind of discovery that no family ever expects to face in a place they consider their refuge. Johanna's case stood out as especially difficult. It occurred in a place where most children, especially someone her age, would expect to be safest, her own home. When she was discovered, a martial arts belt was found around her neck, tied with deliberate care. This was a belt she had earned through dedication and discipline. It was heartbreaking to learn that something she had worked so hard for was used in such a way. The belt had been wrapped so tightly it caused visible signs of pressure on her face and neck. It was clear the person responsible acted with intention and didn't rush. Later, when her earphones were recovered, they were still in place, possibly worn while she was listening to something. This suggested that she was caught completely off guard. Her clothing had been disturbed, pointing to a concerning moment that, although not taken any further, left clear signs that someone had crossed a serious boundary. There were noticeable changes in how her clothing was found, which raised questions for the investigators. Any situation that gives even a slight indication of something unusual is always taken seriously during an investigation. Officers followed protocol and examined every detail with care. Johanna's passing left a deep impact on her loved ones. It was a heartbreaking moment for her entire family. Her siblings saw something that no one should ever have to see, and it left a lasting mark on them. But while they were dealing with their sorrow, their focus remained on one thing: finding the person responsible.
As part of their standard process, police began by checking the area around Johanna's home. They spoke to neighbors and worked to narrow down who might have been involved. Johanna was still very young. She didn't have personal conflicts or relationships that might explain what happened. So officers focused on individuals in the area with a history of past offenses. That's when they found someone who stood out. Coons Jr., a neighbor with a record going back 3 decades. The initial interview didn't raise any immediate red flags. The officers were conducting their usual neighborhood canvassing, checking if anyone had noticed anything out of the ordinary that day. When they came across Roy, he appeared to be just another neighbor going about his business. The detective leaned in slightly, keeping his voice calm but focused. "So you live here, right?" "Yeah, that's right." "Were you around most of the day?" "I was in and out, mostly working on some installations." "Did anything catch your attention? Anything unusual happen that stood out?" Roy shook his head, maintaining eye contact. "No, nothing that I noticed. It's usually pretty quiet around here." If this had been any other neighbor, the officers might have ended their questioning quickly and moved on without much concern. But the detectives were aware of Roy's background, and they knew it was important to look closer rather than dismiss him. This man has a long and complicated history with the law, having been arrested more than 100 times since he was 19 years old. In 1999, he was convicted for his 3rd DUI offense. In 2001, he was found responsible for a serious incident that involved causing harm to another person. Then in 2006, there were 2 separate cases where he was held accountable for causing significant impact to others. Finally, in 2010, he was convicted of burglary involving unlawful entry into a property. Coons Jr. had been involved with the law for many years, with his first arrest dating back to 1991 and his most recent one occurring just months before Johanna's passing. A significant number of these arrests were related to violations of his parole conditions, which suggested a pattern of behavior unlikely to change soon. Over time, his offenses became more serious, moving from repeated driving violations to a conviction for burglary, a concerning escalation that drew the attention of authorities. As the investigation unfolded over the days that followed, the police maintained close surveillance on Roy to observe how he would respond. It wasn't unexpected that he took a strong interest in the case, often seen outside his home, trying to pick up any information he could about what was happening. What stood out, however, was the way he behaved when officers returned to question him further. Usually, individuals are willing to assist the police during an active investigation. Roy's hesitation raised questions. Was it his history with law enforcement that made him uneasy, or was there something else causing his discomfort? His behavior grew increasingly tense and defensive, which made the officers more cautious and led them to keep a closer watch on him. They soon noticed that he frequently glanced in the direction of Johanna's home, which only deepened their suspicions and concern about his possible involvement. Whenever a serious incident occurs, it's common for the police to remain on the scene for an extended period. This often draws a crowd of onlookers, neighbors who stop by out of curiosity or concern. However, something about Coons caught the attention of a female officer who was the second to arrive. She felt there was a reason to approach him and start a conversation. Roy's frustration quickly became apparent, but one of the officers addressed him clearly and calmly. "We're just here to gather some information, ask a few simple questions to help us understand what happened." Even after spending several days nearby, Roy acted as if he was unaware of the full details of the incident just a couple of houses down. Still, it was obvious that the frequent questioning and police presence were causing him some discomfort. "Are you feeling upset because of what happened in your neighborhood? That's completely natural. At the same time, you have to understand that the police are doing their job and need to conduct a thorough investigation. Wouldn't it be easier for you to share what you know so we can clear your name and focus on other leads?" Honestly, a straightforward and calm response from Roy could have made this part of the process much smoother and less stressful for everyone involved.
It was precisely Roy's reserved and somewhat guarded attitude that prompted the investigators to return to his residence for further questioning. Eventually, they decided to ask him directly if he had any involvement in the tragic incident involving Yhoana Arteaga. "No particular reason," Roy responded quietly. "We just want to ask a few more questions because I'm home more than most folks around here. Like I said, I mostly keep to myself and don't go out much. I know how I can get when I get upset, so I just stay inside. Just keep my number, all right? I've got yours, and if I see or hear anything out of the ordinary, I'll let you know." When Roy said he knows how he is, it left the officers wondering what exactly he meant. Was he referring to a quick temper or something else entirely? The facts were clear. At 45 years old, he was still living with his parents, without a steady job, and spent most of his time indoors, avoiding much contact with the outside world. By this point in the investigation, the police felt it was necessary to gather DNA evidence from his property. To do this, they collected a cigarette butt Roy had carelessly discarded on his front lawn. "The concept is straightforward," an officer explained. "Anything that's been discarded can carry traces of you. A cigarette butt is especially useful because even though you're only touching the outside, your saliva is deposited inside the filter. This makes it an ideal item for collecting DNA that could link someone to a particular location or event." The cigarette butt was collected and sent off to the lab, where a DNA profile was developed to be matched against the evidence found at the scene. The case was about to become more complex before any progress could be made. As investigators focused more on Roy Coons Jr., they began pressing him with more detailed questions, especially about any possible reasons behind the crime. "I really don't know enough to say what might have happened," Roy said hesitantly. "Maybe there was something going on between them, or maybe someone showed up unexpectedly, but staying there long after wouldn't make sense. If a simple break-in turned into something worse, you'd have to be in their situation to understand."
He seemed to be describing a scenario where a burglary was interrupted, someone waiting for the family to leave so they could take valuables, unaware the young girl was still at home, which caused panic and unintended consequences. That explanation made sense on the surface, but the question was whether Roy had actual knowledge or was just guessing to fill in the blanks for the police. When asked about his whereabouts on the day of the incident, Roy said he only stepped out briefly to buy cigarettes and take a friend's dog for a walk. The officers then asked about his last interaction with Patricia or her children, knowing Roy sometimes helped by mowing the lawn. "Have you ever been inside their home?" an officer asked. "Let me think. I've been over there a few times to help with yard work," Roy answered cautiously. This line of questioning was clearly preparing for the next phase of the investigation, as the police waited for the lab to return their findings. When the lab results finally came back, they brought a surprising and troubling development. Roy's DNA was identified on the back of a windowsill at Johanna's house. It was also discovered on a shirt and a sock found at the scene. Further, a YSTR profile matching Roy's was detected on Johanna's cheek, her left arm, and lower body. However, his DNA was not found on the martial arts belt that was identified as the instrument involved in the crime. Additionally, none of the fingerprints recovered from the scene matched his prints. This combination of evidence sent mixed messages to the investigators, complicating their understanding of his involvement. "It's often quite difficult to recover clear fingerprints," an officer explained. "Many times, fingerprints are absent or can be easily wiped away. What's intriguing is that the day after the incident, Coons was seen walking along the street by a police officer. During their brief interaction, the officer noticed latex gloves visibly sticking out of his pocket. This detail raised further suspicion. Roy was carrying gloves, which could explain the absence of fingerprints, yet his DNA was present inside the home, even though he claimed never to have entered. Despite these conflicting signals, the police pressed on and asked Roy if he had noticed anyone unusual in the area in the days before Johanna's death. "Have you seen any unfamiliar vehicles or strange behavior around here?" they questioned. There were definitely some odd vehicles driving around, which seemed to make things tenser. One truck, a big customized one, came up this way. It had some kind of wild decoration on it that stood out, Roy recalled. At first, this detail might have sounded a bit odd, but the officers couldn't overlook it, especially since there were other fingerprints found at the scene as well. The police believed Roy might have been involved in some complicated situation with other people, and that he was trying to shift the blame onto them. There were several other male DNA profiles discovered in that room and on the victim, the investigators reported. While the detectives were still trying to figure out exactly what had happened between Roy, Johanna, and potentially others. Roy's father was publicly defending his son during a TV interview. "He's not the type to do something like that. I heard there were dangerous people with weapons causing trouble around here," he said, referencing rumors about other troublemakers in the neighborhood. By this stage, Roy Coons Jr. had officially become a suspect, and the police informed the media that his DNA was connected to the investigation. The scientific analysis performed by both the Metro Police Department and the State Crime Lab was vital in this case. After speaking with the family and neighbors, it was clear that Roy had never been properly introduced to Johanna. He had only cut the grass a few times and exchanged brief greetings with Patricia. There was no logical reason for his DNA to be inside the home. Yet the more Roy talked with the officers, the more upset he seemed about what happened to Johanna. "I would never let anyone cause her trouble, and if I knew anything, I would have done everything possible to keep her safe," he said with sincere feeling. It's important to keep in mind that Roy expressed he would have done whatever it took to protect Johanna. When asked what he believed should happen to the person responsible, Roy answered clearly, "I would want to make sure they are properly questioned and held accountable."
Roy Coons made a serious misstep. Investigators often let those they're questioning continue talking, knowing that silence can lead people to reveal more than they intend. In one of these moments, Roy began to speak without being prompted, and what he said caught the officer's attention. He mentioned something that had never been made public, something that only those closest to the situation, such as the family and a few key investigators, were aware of. It was a detail that hadn't been shared, even with other relatives. This kind of information is typically kept private to protect the progress of the case. This raised new questions. Until that point, Roy was seen as someone merely on the edges of the story. But now, he seemed to know something that no one else outside the immediate circle would have known. Still, this wasn't enough to bring formal charges. Retired Detective Melissa Pinkleton explained that while police do their best to keep certain facts confidential, it's possible for things to be repeated in passing. "I used to work along Dickerson Road, which has lots of apartment buildings and mobile homes. And in places like that, even when officers are careful, people find ways to talk. It becomes like a chain of whispers. Even if the police never released anything, it's possible a version of the story got passed around, and someone picked it up without realizing." Eventually, weeks after the case had begun, the investigative team decided to go through Johanna's phone activity. That's when a key piece of the story came into focus. It turned out that Johanna had left behind an important clue, one that would give new direction to the case. Among Johanna's recent messages, investigators discovered her final exchange with her mother. At 4:15 p.m. on August 10th, Johanna had written a short message that said, "Mom, someone is knocking on the door." And then, at 4:19, the victim wrote back to her mother, "I think it was the man who cuts the yard." That's right, Roy Coons Jr. That message became a turning point. It showed that he was there, in communication with her, just moments before everything changed. At this point, a bigger picture began to take shape. Investigators came to believe that Roy had been closely watching the home. He wasn't just someone passing by. They suspected he had been observing for quite some time, possibly waiting for the right opportunity when the house was quiet and unattended. His knowledge of the family's schedule and movements suggested something far more intentional. Then, in September of 2017, the case took a serious turn when Roy Coons Jr. was officially arrested. He was charged in connection with what had happened to Yhoana Arteaga. What stood out was that earlier on, Roy had spoken freely about technology, ironically highlighting the same tools that helped investigators trace his involvement. Technology's powerful these days. Everything's tracked now. Folks don't even realize how it's changed. I've spent hours just dealing with how things have moved forward, Roy once remarked, without knowing how right he was.
As soon as the community in Tennessee heard about the arrest, many people weren't surprised at all. "From day one, I had a feeling," said one local resident. "He used to mow lawns around here, and the way he carried himself, it just didn't feel right." Margaret, who lived nearby and had attended Johanna's memorial, also shared her experience with Roy. "I remember walking up to him, handing him a candle to show support. He didn't say a word, just lowered his head and walked away. Something about that moment told me he wasn't at peace. It felt like he was carrying something heavy inside." Roy wasn't the only one facing difficult questions. Members of the Tennessee Police Department also had to reflect on their actions. Despite Roy's long record, including over 100 arrests and several parole violations, he was still free and unsupervised. Many in the community began asking how someone with such a history could move so freely, especially when he was known to commit repeat offenses. The system that was supposed to prevent future harm had clearly failed to stop him from getting this far. A senior officer shared his frustration. "There's hardly a person in this department who doesn't feel uneasy about this. We repeatedly arrest individuals for serious offenses, and many times they're released back into the public. That's a concern we've dealt with for years, and it hasn't gotten easier." Once Roy Coons Jr. was officially charged and placed in custody without the option of bail, the reaction from the community was largely one of relief. People felt safer knowing he was no longer out in public. However, the legal path ahead was not simple. One major challenge in the trial was the absence of direct evidence. No eyewitness could testify that Roy was present at the home that day. There were no security camera recordings placing him at the scene, and no neighbors had seen him entering or leaving. What they did have was a set of genetic results, something the defense team questioned from the start. The lab analysis showed that a YSTR DNA profile, collected from specific areas during the investigation, matched the genetic signature of Roy Coons Jr. While this appeared to link him to the scene, the method itself only traces shared male lineage and cannot confirm a precise time or action. The prosecution leaned heavily on this evidence, believing it tied Roy to what had occurred in the home. But in the courtroom, this created a challenge. The case was now riding on circumstantial findings. And while such evidence can raise strong suspicions, it does not always meet the high standard required to secure a conviction, particularly when the charge is as serious as this. Roy's defense attorneys were quick to point that out and used it as the foundation of their argument. "You're not going to hear any witness say that my client entered the home on that day," the lead defense lawyer told the jury. "There's no video, no testimony, no one who claims he had any issue with the family before. The state is asking you to connect the dots, but those dots don't make a full picture. You're being asked to assume things without hard proof." The defense pointed out that the DNA found didn't offer solid proof. It was only a few skin cells, not enough to prove anything specific, like a direct involvement in the incident. But despite that, the overall chain of events created a strong impression that Roy was involved. Everything, from what he said to what others noticed, started to come together, creating a powerful argument that couldn't be ignored. One key detail stood out. During questioning, Roy mentioned how Johanna had passed away. At that time, investigators hadn't released any public information about the cause. The only way he could have known about that would be if he had been there, or had spoken with someone who was. That comment became an important part of the case against him. Johanna's final texts were also hard to dismiss. In one message sent at 4:19 p.m., She described a man knocking on the door. She identified him as someone who had worked in the area before, someone who regularly mowed lawns. Investigators later confirmed that Roy Coons had been hired to cut the grass in that trailer park. That small detail gave the message significant weight in court. After the incident, Roy didn't stay in the neighborhood. He moved into a homeless shelter close to the trailer park where he tried to keep a low profile. But eventually he opened up to another man staying there. Feeling that he was in a place where no one knew him, Roy spoke freely, perhaps more freely than he realized. The man he spoke to remembered the conversation clearly. Roy asked him if he had ever taken someone's life. The man was caught off guard and said no, but Roy continued and admitted that he had. He didn't say who or when, but he did say something the man wouldn't forget. "I was so freaked out. I never get scared." That statement stayed with him for a long time. At the time, Moses, the man from the shelter, had no idea Roy was connected to any criminal case. But once the news began to spread, and he recognized Roy from the reports, he contacted the authorities. His information helped fill in the final gap in the timeline and gave the jury one last point to consider. Detectives said Roy had isolated himself. He avoided people and chose to sleep in a wooded area not far from where the incident took place. That decision, combined with the way he talked about what happened, gave investigators a deeper look into his mindset. It showed he was not unaffected by what had occurred. What became clear was that this was likely Roy's first serious offense of this nature, and it showed. He wasn't able to cope afterward. He didn't act like someone who had done this before. Instead, he seemed overwhelmed by guilt, and that guilt led him to speak when he should have stayed quiet. On July 15, 2019, the courtroom reached its final conclusion. After reviewing the evidence, the texts, and the testimony from Moses, the jury made their decision. Ronald Donald Coons Jr. was found guilty on both counts, second-degree murder, felony murder. As the verdict was read, Roy appeared on the verge of tears, but it was too late for regrets. These tears reflected sorrow over his lost freedom, not remorse. He received a life sentence plus 25 additional years. The jury reached its decision. During the civil trial, Roy was asked to speak directly to Johanna's family. He said, "I can't apologize for something I didn't do, but I am sorry for your loss." Despite facing a life sentence, his words showed little true regret. It's hard to believe he thought this would change anything. Meanwhile, Patricia shared how Johanna's passing deeply affected her life. "Our lives have changed in ways we never expected. She still feels the pain, especially when she thinks about the day she came home with her other children and realized Johanna was no longer there." Some feelings stay with you for a very long time. Johanna is remembered during community gatherings where people hope such events never happen again. We need to support both him and Johanna's family. Life can be complicated, so we have to remain aware. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe for more stories. Take care and see you next time.